Okay, it's recording. You can go ahead and start.
Well, very good. Thank you, Armando, and thanks for everybody for walking me through here. I think loading that Nixdap patch really worked out well. So probably I could use my computer now, but since we're dialed on the phone, I'll just continue. You know, we left off talking about grounded theory. We just sort of did a nice basic introduction and kind of went through about 3/4 of the slides I had. And what I thought I would do with this, I added a few slides from last time. And what I wanted to do is just sort of go through a coding sequence, just to sort of demystify what we mean by open coding, axial coding, or selective or reflective coding, selective coding, and those sorts of things. I also wanted to point out that on the deck itself, I do have some key terms that I think are often used around grounded theory designs. Things like the category, core category, properties, dimensional range. I'm going to let me just present this as a slideshow or as a presentation. And also the context and then strategies for understanding the consequences of emerging theory. You know, the one thing that I thought was that Strauss and Corbin did very well was begin to label some of the key terminologies and processes to sort of demystify it. Again, I'm critical of their work, particularly at the end of the coding sequence, when I think they just, particularly for the novice researcher, make them do too big of a leap to get into theoretical aspects. But many of the things that they did in terms of really kind of dialing out the coding sequence, I think was very helpful. The other thing that I would add that I took from the Strauss and Corbin's work was this notion of constant questioning. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today when I talk about the relationship guide that we talked about last week. But really it is about establishing a constant awareness of asking questions. Remember again, and this is where a lot of novice grounded theorists go wrong, you know, don't go looking for a theory. You've got to let it emerge, and that's where this questioning comes in. If we go and we're seeking something, that confirmation of something that we think is true, and we want it to be true, and so we let this theory come out because this is how we see it. And instead of letting the data talk, letting that theory emerge from the data, that's the real practice in grounded theory, is that constant questioning, that constant comparison. Remember again, early on in this methodology, they called it the constant comparison method. So having those key questions and be in that questioning mode. And another strategy, I think, is the ability to, once you start to see something that looks interesting, is to take a step back. I've often used a Monet haystack as an example. You know, if you look at a painting by Monet, they have a almost out of a focus characteristic. And so, you know, if we step in and get closer to the painting, we don't get any more clarity. I mean, we keep stepping closer and closer, and if we got really close, we could start seeing the texture of the brush strokes, or we could see the different pixels of the color. But we don't get any more understanding of the art itself. For a Monet, you've got to step back and kind of take it in and experience not only the painting, but experience others and how they're experiencing it as well. And I think that's a critical trick for a grounded theorist, is to always be, first of all, asking questions of the data, knocking at that meaning, but also occasionally when things start to emerge, to step back and again ask that question: what's happening here? What am I seeing? What is this trying to tell me? Is this this? Is this that? And again, so we've built some structures to help the emerging or the novice grounded theorist move through this. The one thing, last thing I wanted to identify is this notion of selective coding. It's also a kind of an interpretation, but Strauss and Corbin call it the process of selecting the core category. Now, this is a place where I felt like they did some serious, you have to do some serious mental leaps to go from open and axial coding into selective coding. If you don't understand a process, if you don't have use some matrices to really start understanding what your data is trying to tell you. And that's where I designed the reflective coding matrix, and where a colleague of mine, Dr. Karen Wilson-Scott, developed the conditional relationship guide. We built these processes together. We built them to help our students who were struggling with that leap make that leap. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today too. So I'm going to have a little fun here, and I'm going to tell you that the example is a bit cornball, but I'm definitely going to be talking about the theoretical best chocolate chip cookie. And so I'm going to walk you through the various coding processes, and just to help you get a better understanding. So I'm going to, if you remember this diagram from before, and it's in the deck earlier, I'm going to start off at stage 1 and walk us all the way down through a theoretical position. And I'm going to talk about how we establish all these things using this this idea of going after the theoretical best chocolate chip cookie. So again, my example is a little clumsy at times, but I think it might work. So here's my phenomenon of interest. This is where every grounded theorist starts. So I'm curious. I'm a big fan of chocolate chip cookies. So I'm wondering, what are the sources or procedures that will lead to the construction and consumption of the perfect chocolate chip cookie? I'm interested. That's what I'm interested in as a researcher. So I go to work, and I'm a grounded theorist. So I want to do some theoretical conditioning. So what I have to do is I have to become aware of the ecology. I have to become aware of where my problem exists, or where the opportunity to study this problem exists, or opportunity. What is the process, or what is the issue that I'm trying to uncover? And so how I would go about it in this case, looking for the perfect chocolate chip cookie recipe, is I would start to sample several sources, because I want to get to the best cookie. So, you know, I can sample Chips Ahoy, Nestle's Toll House, several forms of store-bought cookie dough, gourmet recipes, homemade varieties, you know, exact recipes, or those recipes that people just use intuitively. In other words, they don't really measure anything out. They just sort of, they kind of shoot from the hip. Maybe they're better cooks. But really what this is all about is getting yourself prepared to understand the theory that might try to emerge. So this theoretical conditioning, or building this kind of theoretical sensitivity, really answers 3 questions. What's the real issue that I'm trying to get after? That's a real struggle for novice grounded theorists. Oftentimes, again, they see their problem and they're looking for a set solution. In other words, they think they already know. I say this because I fell victim of that as a novice grounded theorist myself. Instead of really allowing a theory to emerge, I had an idea of what that theory was supposed to be. And I have to tell you, my methodologist, who was Dr. John Creswell at the time, wasn't having any of it. It actually added about another 6 months to my data coding process because of the way I went after it. So it was a hard lesson to learn. You have to be able to let that data emerge. If you go looking for a confirmation, it just biases you. And so constantly bracketing out that thing that you think is right allows that theory to come, and it also allows for surprises to happen that you might not have been expecting, or those real unique answers that really do go at the heart of a problem or an opportunity. So again, looking for this theoretical conditioning really allows you to begin to get to have some awareness of what's going on within the ecology of your study. I often have said that you don't want to go too far into the theoretical literature, because if you do, you might make it harder to bracket out things. In other words, you might say, oh, that's just like this, or that's just like that. So you want a framing review, but you want to position where the study belongs, but you don't want to go in too tight. But you also want to be able to understand the data. If something critical starts to emerge, you want to be able to see it. I've often said if you don't have theoretical sensitivity, you might be picking up nickels and stepping over $5 bills. At the same time, you don't want to go looking for, a dime and forget everything else that's on the ground, because that dime is what you think this is. So again, this theoretical conditioning, theoretical sensitivity really allows you to get the right frame for a grounded theorist to approach a problem or opportunity. So it also allows us to really start looking at what are the facts as we understand them now. Most problems, most opportunities don't stand alone. There's something that led us to that. And so we know certain things about what we're looking for. And what are those? What are those things that we know? And by articulating those things, we can also help bracket away those things that may bias us if that story or that data starts to or that theory starts to emerge from the qualitative data. The other thing that I think theoretical conditioning does is it really helps the novice researcher start to understand what their role in the study is. And theoretical conditioning means that I'm becoming aware of the processes or literature and other things that are surrounding my phenomena of interest. So critical first step is to eat those cookies and make sure that you know what the ecology is about. So the second step in that big process is begin to sorting out what we learned from really studying that ecology, from sorting out, from getting that theoretical conditioning. So this is, as a novice researcher, I start sorting things out because I don't want to study every cookie. I just want to study study the informants who will give me the best answer. In other words, I purposely want to select my informants. I don't want to just do hodgepodge, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of something else. I want to fine tune. I want to get a homogeneous population that I can look at. So I start again making observations about what's going on through my theoretical conditioning. And so in this case, as I start sorting out my thinking around this, I start to think, well, the best cookies do not come from a bag. So I immediately say I'm not going to, my informants aren't going to be store-bought cookies. I also came to the conclusion, but from my conditioning, that the best cookies are fresh. The best cookies are often intuitive. By that there's something new, unique, different about them. The best cookies don't have any preservatives, and the best cookies are made from scratch. So what this knowledge sorting does is it really starts to help us begin to not only process and generate an awareness of the ecology under study, but we can also begin to understand who's going to be our informants, who are going to be our participants that we want to go after. In this case, I'm not going to go after store-bought cookies, for example. I'm going to go after a different informant, a different participant. So after I go through that, I want to do some reflective sorting. And so I think about what I've learned so far. And again, I'm asking my questions. I'm stepping back. I'm trying to figure out which direction I want to go. So I come up.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just one quick question before I get too confused. How do you find out that the best cookies were not in bag and so on and so forth? Did you pull that information from your sample already?
Yeah. So just like if I was doing a framing lit review, I would use the lit review to frame it. In this case, I'll go back up. What I did in theoretical conditioning is I have sampled a variety of chocolate chip cookies. And so I went out in my conditioning, instead of going into the library, I know I told you this example is pretty cornball, but instead of going into the library or instead of using other reports or other studies, in this case, I went out and I sampled a variety and I began to sort out. I started getting conditioning about this whole chocolate chip cookie area, Mondo. It's a great question. And so
Thank you.
That's where I came up with that. And so here I'm starting now to just become very reflective about what it is and how I want to go about this. And so I start thinking to myself that the best source of recipes right now is unknown. And so I don't know where that is. And there may be a lot of sources. I could use cookbooks and other things. I could use, I could go out and interview individuals and find out what their best recipes are. And I need to also, once I figure out what the best source of those recipes are, I'll need to test those recipes. In this case, I'm going to interview those recipes. So then that's how we're going to go about this. So in reflective sorting, it's just an examination of key concepts, phenomena, events, and organizing them according to our knowledge of the ecology. It's used to develop a description of the setting, the actors, the process, and events. And it's also later on when we get into analyzing your data and beginning to really build your theoretical position. It can be this kind of activity of knowing that you've been into the ecology can be a useful triangulation or verification tool as well. So that's the other thing that I like about this long-term, a longer view of grounded theory. From my reflective sorting, I start to build my questions. These are, I call them selective questioning because I could ask a lot of different questions, but now I'm starting to dial in. I'm starting to dial in on what exactly it is that I want to go after. So I'm asking myself a set of questions. You know, what's the best source of recipes? What makes a recipe functional? Are all recipes equal? Where will I find the best procedures for making chocolate chip cookies? These are things I'm now thinking about. I'm sensitized. I've done some sorting. Now I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to go after my data. And this is really a systematic process of defining the area of interest through a process of questioning. An assessment of discoveries obtained during reflective and general sorting lead to the development of the purpose of the study and the formulation of the grand tour question, that overarching question. So again, I'm just starting to fine-tune things here. And from my clumsy example, these are the kind of questions I might be asking. From your study or a study that you might do in grounded theory, they might be entirely different types of questions. But again, this kind of questioning really helps us begin to frame in and dial into not only the purpose statement, but also what the overarching research question might be as well. Then we come up with our framing question. Now, early on in the grounded theory process, this framing question could become our overarching question or our grand tour question, the central question of our study. It could come, but at this time, because I'm not really there yet. I'm still sort of getting ready to build a pilot. What I have here is I'm coming up with the question that I want to begin with this study. So I've decided as a researcher that I'm going to focus this study on a homogeneous area. What are the characteristics of the theoretical best chocolate chip cookie recipe found on the World Wide Web? So I've made a distinction now. I still want to find the characteristics of the best theoretical chocolate chip cookie, but my homogeneous sample in this case is now going to be only those recipes that I find on the World Wide Web. Not going to be in a cookbook. They're not going to be in something that on a card that my mother gave me. I now have a very homogeneous population that I'm going to go to. So that's my question, my framing question. And as I said, it often stands as the forerunner of the grand tour or studies overarching question. And sometimes they change, sometimes they don't. But this is what all my work at building sensitivity and being reflective and getting myself aware of the ecology of my study, getting ready to do this I think is one of the most critical and often overlooked steps in grounded theory. If you don't do this pre-work, then you often are wondering what to do with this massive data that I get, because there's no way to connect it to some previous knowledge. So again, going through these early processes I think are critical for success in a grounded theory study. So what I do from the framing question then is I want to start building my initial interview protocol from which I'll launch. And so I've decided that these are going to be my questions. What are the characteristics of chocolate chip cookie recipes? And sub-questions might be, what is the correct temperature? What are the proper mixing procedures? What are the essential ingredients? What is the proper consistency of the dough? What is the proper length of time for baking the cookies? What are the proper post-baking procedures? Again, these are simply going to be my interview questions to my participants. So I have 3 informants, and for this little clumsy example, absolutely sinful chocolate chip cookies, Allie's chocolate chip cookies, and absolutely the best chocolate chip cookies. Now, I got to tell everybody, I actually did this presentation, this thing in front of a class when I worked at another university, and I actually took the time to make these recipes, and I had them during class. So I don't have them for you guys, but they're really good cookies. So here's my data. Here's my participants. In other words, usually in Guided Theory, we go out and we do interviews, often in-depth interviews. But here, this is going to stand in for my interview. So this is my first participant, the absolutely best chocolate chip recipe. So pretend for our example that this was my first participant, and I interviewed him, and what we're really looking at here is the transcript of that interview. But this is what I'm going to break apart, go through open coding and reflective coding and selective coding to build a theoretical position around what is the theoretical best chocolate chip cookie. I have other participants. There's the absolutely sinful chocolate chip cookie recipe, and then here's Allie's chocolate chip cookie. So I have my participants, and I want to start breaking it down. So what open coding, remember, is really about breaking the data down. So open coding is that systematic process of sorting through the data and categorizing it by events and concepts and by their properties and dimensional range. So I'm just going to start breaking those recipes down. So if I go back to my first data set, I think was right here, all I'm doing now is going through here, and I'm beginning to break out the critical elements. So again, here are some of the codes that I might take. One of the things, a code note I might make is, oh, it's a secret family recipe. That seemed important. Oh, time, it takes 20 minutes. A temperature, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Tells me how to beat eggs well with each addition. That seemed like a critical process. Then it gave me some process in a large bowl, how to bring all these things together. Add the eggs one at a time. You know, that's important to understanding the data. And so, and I have, oops, too far. And then I have other open coding things I pull out of here, like the ingredients. That seemed like a code that I need to pull out of here. Fold in the chocolate chips, stir in the vanilla, combine the flour, baking soda, salt, and gradually stir it into the cream to mixture. Drop by rounded spoonfuls onto a prepared cookie sheet. Bake for 8 to 10 minutes. Allow for cookies to cool. You see what I'm doing? I'm just breaking my interview, my data. I'm breaking it down into and horizontalizing it into different categories or different properties, different dimensions of this interview. And so once I've gone through that, then I go through open coding and I break down my transcript, or I break down, in this case, this recipe, and I have these various open codes. So now, once I have those open codes, this is where we want to start looking at that. And remember, this was in last week's slide, this use of the conditional relationship guide. What I like about this, and what Dr. Scott liked about this, was the fact that it was really formatted to ask and answer the relational questions about the emerging codes that are coming out of here. So if I get in the habit, and this is what this relationship guide's for, is to get in the habit of asking, you know, what is this? When does it happen? Where does it happen? Why does it happen? How does it happen? What's the consequence? And so, again, maybe not all of these questions in this relationship guide are appropriate for every data set, but for the novice researcher, what these do is give you a guide to be asking those questions. I think, again, what too many novice researchers do is dive in and get excited about what they think is a theory that's talking to them without asking the critical questions. And to get into that habit of being reflective, of stepping back and asking, what's going on? Again, it's this constant comparison method. And using this guide, I think, is instrumental for producing a solid grounded theory analysis. So the next thing that we would do is we would go from open coding to reflective coding. And reflective coding, remember, is when we begin taking all those categories that came out of open coding, all those codes, single codes. I think I told you, like in the example I was giving you with Karen Wilson-Scott's dissertation, she had something like almost 2,000 open codes, distinct open codes. That then she, through axial reflective coding, actually broke those down into key processes or properties. And so, as I started looking at my interview, I started thinking about how do I begin to combine or coalesce those open codes into core category or to code categories. And so categories that started to emerge for me, or properties that started to emerge for me, were the type of recipe, the time, process, equipment, temperature, ingredients. So, axial coding or reflective coding is really just a process of comparing the categories generated through open coding to our understanding of ecology. And again, it goes back to our theoretical conditioning. I already know what I'm looking for and what I hope to find in a good cookie. Now I want to do is let the data sort of emerge, let these recipes kind of talk to me. So open coding fractures the data. Axial reflective coding determines its source, and in the process undercovers its properties, its processes, its dimensions, the context and strategies for understanding the consequences as it relates to the ecology itself. So again, we're just starting to bring back what we fractured in open coding. We're starting to bring them back into, chunk them in a way that helps us reduce our data, but also helps nudge us towards understanding what the central, or what we call in grounded theory, the core category is. And that's really what we're looking for. Ultimately, as we're going through grounded theory processes, we're looking for that open or that core category. And here's just some more reflective notes, finishing, and then special notes. So I reduced probably a dozen or more open codes. I brought them down into 6 for our example here. And now, I could do the same thing. I could go through all the other recipes, and I would do the same. I could do the same thing. And this is a neat trick that I want to tell anybody that's thinking about doing this. The way this works is you need to code out you need to do open coding and then reflective or axial coding with each transcript one at a time, and then begin to move towards the reflective coding matrix. And then after you establish the matrix for one, then go back and do the next one, and do the same thing. Break that recipe down into open codes, coalesce it again into your reflective or axial coding, and then after you do that, then you can take that participant and you can begin to add them to the reflective coding matrix, which is right here. This is the matrix that you can use to begin to understand what's going on here. So this is the one that I've just simply built for our first participant. So again, my core category that I'm playing with right now is the perfect recipe. Properties is type of recipe, the process, equipment, and ingredients. And I got these properties by collapsing my open codes into smaller pieces. The process for understanding this was World Wide Web. The procedures, mixing and baking and finishing, ingredients, preparation, and then the dimensions from this first one, a type of recipe, the secret family recipe. That's right on my data set. Context, I found it in a search. the processes here, again, the procedures, dimensions of procedures are time, temperature. In other words, you're starting to see where all the data that I have is starting to come alive. And we're starting to build our understanding from this one data set. Now, I would go back and I would interview the next recipe, and I would do the same thing. And it may have an impact on my properties. In fact, what I might find is that I end up with a 5th or 6th or even 7th property. I don't know that yet, not until I begin to break it down. I'm letting the data talk to me. I don't want to force fit it. And I want to use its language as much as possible. At the same time, I am looking to get down to that core category, and that's really what I'm looking for. And the core category could shift, you know, as we start to move. That's the other thing about grounded theory. It really is an emerging process. The one thing that you'll notice that I haven't filled out is strategies for understanding the consequences. And the reason why I haven't done that yet, that piece is usually best to wait until you have gone through at least several of your transcripts before you really start to do that. Now, you might want to do what Kathy Sharma suggests, and I call them code notes. She calls them memoing. It doesn't really matter. You know, make your notes. Keep your field book tight with you. As you start to have ideas about this thing, just don't let them float away. Write them down on, make a memo or make some code notes in your field book or in your computer, whatever, to keep track of this stuff, because ultimately the strategies for understanding the consequences of what you're seeing are going to be very important in your final write-up of talking about your emerging theory. I'm going to show you another example of one that was much more well done. The clumsy one I showed you was one thing. So here's this is from Karen Wilson Scott's award-winning dissertation on high self-efficacy. And this was the actual final reflective coding matrix that she put together with all her data. And what she came up with is that the core category was a commitment to extraordinary involvement. Properties that emerged that really explain that were the process, position, perception, product, purpose. And the processes that helped understand those properties were choice, conviction, belief, achievement, and development. And then the dimensional range, the codes that really help support that, you could all see that. This is where, you know, she's putting in things that really talk about it. And then the context, challenge, personal criteria, identity, personal goal, personal meaning. And then modes for understanding the consequences in this particular dissertation was, you know, momentum to direction, sacrificing ordinary, extraordinary involvement, self-efficacy, and so forth. Now, here's why this matrix is so critical. First of all, it helps the novice researcher begin to build a way to understand a potential theory that's out there, how to talk to my theory, how to begin to talk about theory generation, how to begin to doing my final write-up. What's beautiful about these reflective coding matrices, if once I have my core category, I understand what the theory is that's trying to come out. And if I just flip this thing upside down, I can, in my chapter 5, or my final chapter, I can begin to talk about this theory from the bottom up. In other words, as I start talking about this emerging theory, I'm going to start with modes of understanding. Then I'm going to tell them about the context. Then I'm going to tell them about the dimensional ranges. Then I'm going to tell them about the processes and properties. Then I'm going to talk about that core category that really emerged from all this. And then from that, I'm going to write up my theoretical statement. But what this matrix does is it allows a way for us to collect our data, put our data together in a meaningful way that we can then use to build our narrative in our final chapter as we begin talking about the emerging theories. It's a very powerful process. I think I have some other, again, it's just as my definition of it is just a tool to bridge the process of reflective coding and selective interpretation. It's useful in isolating and then defining the core category by its linkages to the properties, processes, dimensions, context, and understanding for the consequences. I'm also told, by the way, that you can build this within in vivo. I haven't done it myself. I'm told it's possible. The other thing I wanted to just talk about are other matrices that are developed that are very important as we start talking about our theory. And then these can be both, conditional matrices can be both textual and graphical. So here is an example from another study on community of practice. This is about proposal development within a scientific community. So here is a textual conditional matrix. And here, this is where we start talking about the overarching concept, the attributes of the emerging theory, actionable elements of it, and then the substantive theory that starts to come out of it. So in grounded theory, you can, in conditional matrices, they can be both textual, like this one, or they can also be graphical. Now, here's the same matrix, conditional matrix, only this one is done in a graphical form. So if you're looking at how proposal development happens on a scientific team, this theory substantive theory would say that owning, becoming part of it, feeling like you belong, then being into that process itself of visioning, reviewing, this feedback will lead to your ability to contribute well. And so again, it was just, and I oversimplified Dr. Carlson's theory there, but I just wanted to show how you can use both textual to create a conditional matrix if you're not creative, or you can use, and I have some other examples too. You can create a graphic of your emerging theory. So here, let me just walk through a couple other. This is another example. This is again coming from it's coming from this reflective coding matrix on high self-efficacy. And what she did with this study is, and again, I'm just kind of taking you through the whole thing. She did an initial and brief literature search that allowed her to have theoretical sensitivity. She built her theoretical training through being part of this ecology, through observations. Her husband actually was what led her into this interest. He was a career engineer who decided he wanted to be a concert pianist. And he gave up his engineering job, bought a piano, and went to work at it. And he devoted himself to it. And it was healthy and health-promoting, and it changed their relationship. And so she wanted to know more about what happens to people after age 50 who go on to pursue different pursuits other than what they were trained for. What happens? And that was really the issue of her study. And so, again, she went through open coding analysis, but she went through the reflective coding analysis, where she assembled new things. She's asking herself what's happening here. She went through the selective coding to validate those relationships. And then finally, in grounding the theory, I love this language of letting it crystallize, letting it come to you, letting it emerge. What's the data telling you? What is it saying to do? And then what she did then, again, she started off with her informants. She started off with 1,908 categories in open coding. These are just some examples of it. Age limitations in biking unknown, age limitations in riding unknowns. You see what I mean. These are just open codes. Then she broke those things all down, all these codes down into 54 categories. So you can see the advantage of these coding sequences of moving from open to reflective in that they allow you to condense the data in meaningful ways, to reassembling it in ways that you can use it. And then, by the way, this little diagram here, Nancy Carlson and I put together, but it really does just talk about the logic flow within the reflective matrix. I'm not going to spend much time here because I want to leave plenty of time for questions today. But you can study this for yourself. It just shows the flow for how these matrices come together. And then back to the other study I was talking about on high self-efficacy. This is the reflective coding analysis, and you've seen an element of this matrix earlier. But she took those 54 categories and then started really asking it questions. Again, that's that constant comparison. What are you trying to tell me? When is this happening? Where is this happening? Why? How? What are the consequences? Again, it's grounded theorists have to get into the habit of constantly asking, constantly comparing. And that, to me, that's the most exciting part of the data collection. But if you do this well, you can create this reflective coding matrix. And this is, by the way, this is the actual, I showed it to you before, but this is, again, the actual matrix that was in her dissertation. So, and now this is an example, another example of her conditional matrix. So she took all those elements, and what she was really coming to as the theory that was trying to emerge was this notion of congruous autonomy, that all her data was starting to find that these people, that they become whole, they become, that it feeds them. And all these things around it, epiphany, risk, sacrifice, belief, identity, there are, positive forces. There's the inner voice, inspiration, conviction, habit, practice, and there's personal criteria, so these things start to come in. So she could now take this conditional matrix along with her reflective coding matrix and begin to build her theoretical position. And that's exactly what she did. But again, I've already showed you this. But what I wanted to do now is right here, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. This is as far as we are. We're just now aiming at stage 3, where we're looking at this theoretical position that's emerged. Remember, on the chocolate chip cookie recipe, I said it was a homogeneous environment, or homogeneous sample. For Karen Wilson Scott, it was also a homogeneous sample. All of them were the same age group. They all had the same characteristic. And so, again, great study, produced great results. Meta-analysis. Nancy Carlson and I wrote a paper on this. I think, again, this is where a lot of people get kind of sideways on grounded theory. The real opportunity to get into the theoretical literature is at this stage. Once that theory starts to emerge, once the elements of it start to emerge, that's when the grounded theorist gets back into the literature in a deeper way, much deeper way. But now we're not looking in the literature to just generally understand our phenomena of interest. Now we're getting in the literature to find out gain more understanding about what we're beginning to see. If I go back to, if we begin to see, well, there's this notion with these people that there's this inner voice, or they need positive force, or there's a personal criteria, how to overcome obstacles, how to follow inspirations. Well, we can, and she did, get back into the literature now and start looking at different elements of these properties that are starting to emerge, to start to give her theory power, and start to give that theory connection to the theoretical literature in new ways. So what we called it was basically a meta-analysis. Again, I think when your data is emerging, and of course in University of Phoenix modalities in Chapter 4, I think that's when you really need to be getting back into the literature. When these things start to form, and you start to get ideas around what you're starting to see, now the literature can be used as an instrument to really help you build a strong, solid theoretical position. And so we can end a lot of doctoral dissertations around grounded theory using homogeneous samples. A small pool of informants ends right here at the theoretical position. Now, in Glaser's model, if you wanted to do and it's also in the constructivist model, you have to take it even further. You have to now go and find a heterogeneous group of informants. So, maybe for Karen Wilson Scott's study, for example, she studied people who are 50 years old and older. What are the same things true for 80 and over, or are the same things true for 30 or 20? And so she could go out and begin to conduct interviews on a larger heterogeneous group of informants it becomes a much larger informant pool. And I say the researcher is active in this stage, and by that I mean you're no longer just wanting to see what's emerging from the data. You are beginning to frame your questions and your search around what you found through that earlier process where your position sort of emerged. Because now you're wanting to really dial in and ask much more specific questions. And so your interviews are often shorter. They're often much more direct, where before, if you remember, in a homogeneous population, the researcher is much more passive. That you're wanting that data to tell you what it's trying to say, what it's trying to merge. On the heterogeneous thing, you're getting much more active. And what you're really looking for is what we call in grounded theory saturation. I'm going to tell you this, again, if you're using a homogeneous population, saturation in a grounded theory design happens a lot faster than people think. If indeed you have true homogeneity, you know, the similarities really start to come out. I mean, if you look at the recipes that I had, there's not a lot of difference in them. They're all about the same. And so it would have been easy for me to get to saturation. When we start using heterogeneous informants, let's just say, for example, I wanted to study some element in higher education, and my homogeneous population were just simply students, and I focused in on that. And my heterogeneous population then might be students, administrators, teachers, other support mechanisms. And so in a larger sample, then saturation takes much longer to get to. And you know, I often have found that novice grounded theorists think they've reached saturation a little bit faster than they actually have. But my advice is, once you've done saturation and you think you're there, add at least one more participant to ensure it, because you just don't know. So again, we go through the same process: the interview protocol, open, reflective coding, matrix, interpretation, emerging theory. We build our matrices. We connect it to the literature. We look for fit and relevance to that, and how our data comes together, and then we can produce our formal or substantive theory, and refocus the theory if we want, or apply it to the ecology. Now, what Glaser says that we can do at stage 6 is we can begin to generalize, do a generalization of the theory. In other words, we can begin to generalize qualitative data. I don't know if we'd find too many people that would support that just yet. Glaser is a big fan of that, but just know that. So anyway, stage 4 and on is really Glaser and Strauss's original model. Remember, these two came together, two sociologists came together. One of them was very quantitatively, and one of them was much more qualitatively designed, and their original approach was much more reflective of what you see on this page here. And I probably have done it again. Yes, I have, but there are some time left. Before I open up for questions, Armando, I will just say this. You know, grounded theory is a practice, and as I've often told my beginning students, when they ask me, well, how do I know if I'm doing it wrong? How do I know if I'm doing open coding wrong? I just say to them, there is no wrong. There's just looking at the data and figuring out ways how to break it down. Now, again, we have computer programs that can do that. I actually like to use transcripted notes. I take a highlighter. I use yellow as I go through the first time, and I will, and the next time through, I use a blue marker. And anything that I hit again that was yellow and I hit it over with the blue, it turns green. So I know now on my sheet, once I've gone through it twice, I know that the yellow things are what I picked out in my open code the first time. Anything that is blue is something I picked up on the second time, and anything that's green is something I picked up both times. And then the last time I go through with a red pen to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So again, there are tricks to coding out this data. Anyway, I'm gonna stop here and open it up for questions.
So let's do this. Try each one of you everybody's mute, but try each one of you to unmute his or her phone. If you cannot, then put it in the chat, and I will go ahead and ask the question. Karen, are you saying Karen? No. Okay. Okay. Anybody?
Well, Armando, this is Spencer. I just wanted to unmute and let you know that this is working.
Yeah, I hear you just fine, Mansura.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the great presentation again, Mark, but I let others ask questions if they have any questions.
Okay. So the unmute is working fine. So it's very easy. Just go to the microphone icon and click it, and that will mute and unmute, and that's it. As a reminder, this is being recorded and recording, and I will post the. Do you have anything new on this presentation, Mark?
Yeah, this one is I added some slides on this one, the chocolate chip cookie recipes.
Okay.
That's all I did is just add. It's the same slide, other I added a few there.
Okay.
I also I have several papers. I know Nancy Carlson and I wrote a couple papers on this. Karen Wilson Scott and I have written a couple papers on this. Karen has written a paper on the relationship guide, and I actually have all those as well. And I also posted some resources that I've used in the special interest group as well. So, and if you've got questions at any time around this, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm happy to answer any questions even at a later date. Well, it sounds like I think we're a smaller group today. It doesn't sound like there's too many questions out there. Anything in the notes?
So, Mark, let me ask you this question. You mentioned that Glaser is saying that we can generalize the result in grounded theory, but seems that you disagree, right?
Well, it's not so much that I disagree, Mansur. It's just that I just don't think it's ever landed well. Anybody I've ever talked to, any conference I've ever been to, where these things were being discussed, it just doesn't carry. I mean, even Kathy Sharmas, who was a student of Glaser's, had a little bit of concern about it. But Glaser was always the one, even from the very beginning, who really felt strongly that you can't use small samples in grounded theory. He was talking about hundreds of samples. And of course, to a qualitative researcher, that kind of makes you go weak at the knees, processing that much qualitative data. I suppose there is reasonable, that it's reasonable to think that you could generalize qualitative data. I just, my history, my early roots were in quantitative designs. And to me, I just think it's a bridge too far. I don't know how you can, I suppose you could build statistical significance, but I don't know. It seemed like a reach to me, but I don't have to be right there.
Right. Because, yes, when it comes to qualitative designs, we always say, yes, you cannot generalize. You can just say that the results are applicable to the similar situation. That's the language we prefer to use.
Yes.
But then also I always hear that, okay, the grounded theory can be exceptional. But I see that here also, I kind of agree that, and I was always thinking that why we can generalize grounded theory. I was kind of thinking that maybe the same language should be used in grounded theory, just applicable to the similar situation.
Right. I think you're correct there. Again, I think there are some people in Glaser's camp who are still pursuing this. And again, their answer is that because we're using vast sample size, big sample sizes, big data, that we have more we have more power to make those kind of statements. I don't know. It's never an argument that I've wanted to try to win, because I just feel like too many quantitative scientists would just kind of take it apart.
Well, that goes away my hopes of finding the best chocolate cookie in the world. You know?
But in theory, I'll tell you, in theory. Now, the only way you'll really know, Armando, is to go out and try one of these recipes and try that cookie. And if it is the best, then you confirm the theory. Keep in mind, again, I know a lot of people don't like me saying this, but I've led a lot of grounded theory studies, and I've only led one, just one, that I think really, and that was Nancy Carlson's study, that I thought really went from homogeneous to heterogeneous and ran the whole model, the whole Glazer's model. Most qualitative studies that I've done have used much smaller pools of informants, and they were homogeneous. And so now we're talking about, populations of 8 to 12. I think Karen Wilson Scott, I think she had 8 when she hit saturation. Folks, you're going to hit saturation faster in a homogeneous population. They see the world similar. If I interviewed a bunch of Democrats on how they feel about Trump, I guarantee I hit saturation quick. If I hit a bunch of Republicans, I'm going to hit saturation quick. But if I mix it up and hit the independents and all that, it's going to take me a lot longer. It's just how it is.
Hi, this is Barry. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you so much. But my interest currently is, well, historically I've always been quantitative, but now I'm interested in big data and machine learning, and the social media companies are certainly using techniques, categorization techniques and things, and the marketing companies to look at word streams to generalize from that. I'd just like to hear your reaction to using text mining tools in trying to create sort of categories, ways to classify the way the information streams are being analyzed through the social media mechanisms.
Well, I know enough about this to be dangerous, so let me start with that. I actually think, if it's done well and they have a good process, I could see where you could build a program around these ways that grounded theory works, and create a text mining processes. The piece that I'm not sure about, and I don't know enough about programming, so I don't know how you train a machine to ask questions about what it's uncovering, because both Glaser and Strauss and Kathy Charmaz all agree that there is that constant questioning process. That what allows the researcher to really engage is really to ask questions of the data as it's starting to emerge. I don't know how you build that in. Not that it couldn't be done. I just don't understand how that would happen, Mary.
Yeah, I agree with you that it would that would take some probably anchoring in with the software to try and look at various theories and things, but that then might bias the interpretation from your perspective. But you can certainly identify trends with analyzing the big data. What you conclude from that is, and I think just being able to get a handle on the data and categorizing it in terms of trends is informative in itself.
But, the one thing about grounded theory can do, and I know we're out of time here, but I think one thing it can do, we talk about that qualitative research is value-laden and that quantitative research is value-free. what I think we can produce through grounded theory is a much more objective stance, that it's a very pragmatic stance, that the theories that emerge are value informed. They're not value free and they're not value laden, but we're using those values to inform the theory that's trying to emerge. So it's interesting. Some people say grounded theory was one of the early mixed methods approaches. I don't know if I agree with that, and that there's no quantitative part to this. You know, I think it was really a pragmatic approach to understanding a social event. And in the case of Glaser and Strauss, you know, I think they were, if I remember right, it was about pain or dying, and I can't remember right now. But anyway, I know we're out of time. Mansoura, Armando, everyone that was on the call, just thank you so much. I don't want to keep everybody long today. Again, I'm happy to continue conversations. It's one of my favorite topics.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thank you, Mark. And also, just to let everybody know that we have this discussion thread in the website, Research Methodology Group, Special Interest Group site. So if there are any questions, you may want to post your questions there. That way, I think we may generate a conversation really, and your question might be other people's question as well. So I invite everyone to post the questions there, and it would be great that I think Mark would look at them and answer, and then we'll have a conversation going on there.
I've been in there a couple of times. I haven't seen any questions yet, so surprise me.
Sure.
All right, everybody. Hey, thanks so much. Have a great evening.
Okay, thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.